Every story leaves a shadow, and every shadow needs a place to grow. If you found yourself returning to these dark corners night after night, and you'd like to keep the lantern burning, we've just opened a Patreon. If you'd like to join us, you'll find a link waiting for you in the description below. As a Patreon supporter, you'll also receive every new episode 24 hours before it's released publicly, giving you an early glimpse into the darkness. Every contribution goes straight back into the show, improving audio quality, working with talented voice actors, supporting the team behind the scenes, and ensuring the incredible authors who share their nightmares are fairly rewarded. Of course, there's never any obligation. Simply listening means more than you know. But if you'd like to help these tales become even darker, even richer, and even more immersive, I'd be honoured to welcome you. Now, dim the lights, lock the door, and let's return to the darkness. The axe struck with a solid thud. My swings were admittedly wild, but to be fair, who wouldn't freak out when confronted with what I can only describe as some sort of vile little goblin? As the blade sank into its horrid slimy flesh, I was assailed with a smell that was both the stink of stagnant pond water and putrescence. I had been chopping firewood. A normal day. A nice day. The forest has always brought me a sense of peace and wonder, and I loved being in it. I had been living in the forest for decades. It wasn't huge, but it was deep, and it was as far away from civilization as I could reasonably get. I had bought the forest and its land when I was young, and I had made my home in it. 600 acres. 600 acres of trees and streams. It even had a pond on the western edge. I had never made my way into the true heart of my forest. I had never needed to, but it was peaceful, or at least it had been, until about 5 minutes ago. I wrenched the blade free from the thing's chest and watched in abject horror as a jet of what I assume was pus spurted out from the gaping hole left behind. It was thick and a deep yellow, almost orange, and it splattered on the ground like some disgusting jello, wafting that stench almost directly into my face. My skin grew hot and my stomach did a slow flip as the thing screamed in a baby's voice, high-pitched and keening. It pulsed against my eardrums. My heart thundered in my chest. I could feel my pulse beating in my neck. Every breath was thick and deep, and it burned. It was like breathing in pure ethanol, and that horrible screaming was maddening, like splinters in my brain. I smashed my axe into his face again, and again, and again, desperately attempting to silence those terrible cries. I could feel the sweat dripping down my face as I swung. Its skull was impossibly hard, until finally, with a terrible crunch, its head caved in, and it was silent. The forest around me grew still, as if in awe, at the overwhelming and previously unknown violence that had visited the small corner of my world. I stood, panting and shaking, staring down at the still green form. I took in the razor-sharp teeth that filled a horrid grin that split the bottom part of its face almost in half. I lingered over the wicked piercing claws attached to the abnormally long fingers and toes, with far too many joints, and I slowly became aware of the terrible sound of children giggling. It was the very same sound that had heralded this wicked thing's appearance, and it floated hauntingly through the trees all around me. Dozens of small voices, like children on a playground. I would never hear a child's laughter the same way again. I shook my head, trying to clear it, as I stood straight and gripped the handle of my axe tighter. This was my forest, and I would fight for it. There was blood in the water. It swirled slowly down the gentle current as it leaked from the cuts on my thigh and side. I stood knee-deep in that dark estuary. Small green bodies and various appendages bobbed and dipped like some macabre synchronized swim team. I was bent over, bracing myself in the long heft of my axe, panting through my mouth in an effort not to vomit from the smell as I stared at the blood, almost mesmerized. I blinked my way out of the stupor and straightened wearily. Grabbing the bottom of my drenched shirt, I began ripping it into long bandages. I knew I had to stop the bleeding, and for now, at least, I heard no more of that horrible giggling. The last of those green fiends was currently bobbing its headless way downstream. What a fucking day. I was having a hard time coming to terms with my current reality. I mean, goblins. What else was I supposed to call these vile green beasts? A part of me speculated, hoped even, that I was back in the cabin having some sort of very wild, very vivid dream. The pain burned its way through the cuts in my body, however, made that small little hope dim and then die completely. I stared at the long horizontal lacerations on my right side. They were deep enough to gape if I moved, but not deep enough to expose anything of internal importance. I could see the yellow of subcutaneous fat, but something about them was off. I wrapped my makeshift bandages around my thigh, thinking hard about the injuries. I tied the knot and straightened again, lifted the ragged edges of my shirt, sending up a small thanks that I preferred to wear extra large, and stared. Blood. I stared at the water around me. I knew between my side and my thigh, the water should be red. I should be bleeding like a stuck pig, but the blood in the water wasn't as much as it should be. I frowned as I stared at the wounds, gaping and red like raw meat, but the blood that came from them was thick and slow. This was too much for my brain, so I wrapped them as best as I could, tying it off so I didn't restrict my movement too much. I waded slowly down the stream I had found myself battling in and took a moment to look around. The sun had made its inevitable way across the sky, and I thought it was close to being evening. I blinked, turning slowly, looking at the sky, the stream, and the trees around me, and realised that I didn't know where the fuck I was. I was pretty sure I had been making my way towards my cabin, as I thought this should be the stream that ran about 50 yards from my back porch. It very clearly was not. That stream only ran about a half mile and terminated in a small koi pond I had built about 10 years back. This was more of a creek than a stream, and the forest surrounding me was filled with dark and twisted trees that I did not recognise. I shivered. I could feel panic beating itself against the back of my brain, and I clamped down on it. Panic would be bad. Panic would get me killed. I need to be as clear-minded as possible in the face of the absolute madness I found myself in. I steadied my breathing and calmed myself as best as I could, thinking, as I stood in what was looking increasingly like a swamp. The sun was setting in front of me, which meant that was west. My cabin was in the eastern part of the woods. So I turned my back to the sun and began walking. The sky became harder to see as I made my way slowly through the trees, ears straining for giggling or rustling or anything really. But the forest was silent, unnaturally silent. I grimaced as I ducked under a branch, my wounds pulling sharply as I bent. The trees were heavily packed together, and the going was difficult. Every step began to squish as the ground beneath me became wetter, and the very air seemed to lay like a thick blanket. I coughed as an acrid stench began to seep from the ground, like stagnant pond water and putrescence. The smell seemed to be coming from everywhere. It permeated everything, and was so thick I could feel it, almost like oil against my skin. I paused, ripping off more of my poor shirt to make a mask I could tie across my face, and glanced up. There, about 10 feet above me, almost hidden in the branches, was a goblin. I froze, hardly daring to breathe, not making a sound. I could feel my muscles began to tighten as adrenaline pumped its way through me at the sight of the thing. I stood staring for a solid minute. It wasn't moving. I could see that its eyes, deep red orbs that seemed to radiate a sick light, were closed. I scanned the trees around me nervously. I began to notice more of the gaunt forms amongst the branches, all of them still, all of them silent. I slowly and carefully turned around to go back the way I came and halted. A wall of densely packed trees blocked my way. Their twisted trunks so close together, passing between them would be difficult for a small human. Impossible for an adult. My brain stuttered as I stared at the impenetrable wall, and something began screaming in the back of my mind. I blinked and came to the slow and painful realization that hanging off of those trees were large, pulsing sacs, so deep a green they were almost black. They bulged grotesquely, as some sort of vines, or perhaps veins, were worming their way around the outside of them, slithering just under the surface. I also realized that the forest was no longer silent, and I could hear the awful sound of liquid shifting, of things slithering and oozing, of a sick creaking, as if the trees around me were alive and breathing. The world began to spin around me. I could feel cotton stuffing its way into my brain, numbing me to the terror that threatened to leave me screaming on the ground. I closed my eyes. Hello everyone, if you've enjoyed this story so far and want to experience a completed version, author EvilKrista, or on page known as Krista Abel, has published a full tale, The Forest, in her collection, Dark Arteries. You'll find the link to the book in the description below. Thank you for listening, and let's return to the darkness. With my eyes shut, the sounds around me intensified. Between the squishing, the creaking, and oozing, I began to notice a terrible pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. I could feel it in my chest, in the cuts on my side, in my very bones. It seemed to be quickening, and then, from somewhere in front of me, I heard the horrible sound of meat tearing, a deep and wet sound, followed by splashing liquid and a heavy thud. I couldn't help it. I opened my eyes. There, lying on the ground just in front of that damn wall of trees, and just under one of those disgusting sacks, now limp and split in half, was a fat, pale, white thing. It writhed on the ground. I could see a long whip-like tail with a crowbar on the end, far too many legs, and a skull that was shiny and chitinous looking. It had multiple eyes like a spider, deep red and glowing. It had mandibles, reminiscent of a serrated beak, with two long ebony pincers on each side. It managed to flip itself onto its stomach, getting that multitude of legs underneath it, and the front part of it rose up. A vision of a grub drifted through my mind as the thing rose higher and higher until I realized that it was fucking huge. Those wicked pincers were now directly in line with my face. I looked into its eyes and saw a whirling crimson madness contained within, an intelligence that the goblins simply did not possess. Its pincers began to snap open and closed. I could feel something in my mind, like there was something slithering around in my memories, and then that terrible beak opened, and it spoke. Help me. I hadn't heard my mother's voice in over 20 years. She died when I was young, and her voice was the first of my memories of her to go. But I knew, irrevocably, that it was her voice this terrible thing was speaking with. Help me. I began to shake uncontrollably as the thing started to propel itself towards me. It reminded me of a centipede, its legs moving in a wave-like fashion. It weaved as it moved, almost slithering. I was hypnotized by those terrible eyes, paralyzed as I stood watching what was certain death come ever closer to me. Help me. Its pincers snapped together faster and faster the closer it came. I could feel myself desperately trying to move. I could feel that thing worming its way through my memories, like it was feeding off of them. My mother's face, the name of my first dog, where I was born, flashes of them shooting through my brain like lightning before they were gone, consumed. And that thing just kept coming closer. 15 feet, then 10, then 5. It paused at the sound of more meat tearing, of liquid splattering the dull thuds as more of its kind were birthed in my forest. In that moment, the 1 second its attention was shifted, I felt my mind break into 2 parts. The first part was the part that knew, without the shadow of a doubt, that I was going to destroy every last vile creature in this cursed swamp. The second part held all of my fear, my memories, my pain. I pictured a wall in my mind, made of thick black glass, impossible to get over, impenetrable, unbreakable. On one side was rage and death, on the other, fear and food. I could feel that thing's hold over my body fade. It was still here, inside of my mind, slithering around, feeding. Yet it didn't seem to notice the wall, or that I had taken control of myself back. My hand gripped the handle of the axe tighter as it moved closer. 3 feet. 2 feet. And as it began to lean towards me, pincers clicking, beak opening and closing, I swung. I knew it was too close for me to hit it with the blade, so rather than swing it like an axe, I swung it as if it were a bat, twisting my upper body as I did so, putting all of my rage into it. The haft of the axe connected with the pincher on the left side of his beak, snapping it off. The blade sheared through the back of it, just under the armoured skull, hooking it between the blade and the handle like a lever. I followed through, slamming it onto the ground. It screamed in a voice I no longer recognised. As I held the thing pinned, I noticed, in a vague sort of way, that at some point night had fallen. I could see dull flares of red, sickening lights popping up in the trees. The sleeping goblins. I could see a wearing crimson madness of more and more of these hideous spider-like eyes crawling towards a sound of violence, and I knew with a savage joy that it was time to fight like I had never before. I went somewhere else. I swung as if my axe weighed nothing. I chopped the stinger off a grub, mule-kicking a goblin as it sunk its teeth into my thigh. I spun around, smashing the back of my axe into a clicking mouth as it whispered my name. I hacked the head off a goblin as it lay squealing on the ground. I stomped on a carapace and grinned as it crunched under my boot. I buried my axe into the middle of a segmented body, pinning it. I let go of the axe, grabbed the pincers and pulled, roaring as I ripped an insectoid face in half. I grabbed my axe, yanking it out of the still twitching form as I leapt over the heap of bodies around me. I charged forward, deeper into the woods, moving, always moving. I had my way towards a deep sickness I could feel inside of me, a constant sense of wrong that lay in what I knew was the heart of the forest. I hissed a breath out as claws slashed down my calf. I backhanded the goblin, following through with a mighty chop directly to the middle of its face. I kicked the body away from me and stumbled as I turned. I was bleeding. I could feel the thick warmth of my blood as it oozed from me, as if it were already half coagulated. I was covered in it. I looked up as I steadied myself and saw it. An unnatural clearing just a few yards from me. The trees cut off abruptly in a perfect circle. A circle of unlife. I saw no grass, no plants, just deep, red, hard-packed earth, as if a piece of somewhere else had manifested right here. I could feel it. Something so totally foreign and alien. I was having a hard time processing it. And it felt like death. Like looking into a place between shadows. It was liminal. I limped towards it. I knew that whatever was in the center of that place was the thing I had come here to destroy. I left a trail of red behind me as I limped towards the inevitable conclusion of this horrible day. Adrenaline seeped slowly from my veins and my limbs grew heavy. My axe felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and I dragged it with me, refusing to drop it. I paused at the edge of the twisted forest I had fought through. I knew if I looked behind me, I would be able to chart my path in a winding trail of carnage. I stood, breathing heavily, my boots toeing the line of what hard-packed earth. I could feel a dry heat rising from the ground, completely unlike the swamp. I knew without a shadow of doubt that if I crossed into this place, I would learn the truth. I knew the horrors I had seen so far would pale in comparison to what I would face in that emptiness before me. There were things in there that I could not see, or would not. I wasn't sure which. A deep shudder ran through me. Fuck it. I lifted my axe, gripping it with both hands, and took a step forward. My foot went through what I had thought was deep red dirt, my body twisting in an effort not to plant face first in a ground that was not there. I tumbled down, realizing that it was some sort of dense crimson fog. I could feel my heart in my throat, my stomach bottomed out, and I screamed in terror as I broke through that non-existent barrier. It was like every single dream of falling I had ever had all rolled into one. It felt like forever. I could feel gravity's pull, and I knew that I was about to splatter on the ground. I could feel it rushing towards me. My whole body locked up in anticipation. I impacted the water I had not seen with such force that I blacked out. I woke up sometime later, coughing and vomiting foul liquid. I was laying on the shore of a deep yellow lake. It smelled like sulphur. Every individual cut on my body burned like fire. It felt like I was covered in acid. I began to convulse, and blackness took me again. I was drifting somewhere close to awareness when I realized I was being dragged. I could feel the haft of my axe in my hand and my fist close reflexively around it. My arms were above my head, and there was something wrapped around my left leg. I could feel the ground sliding beneath me as I was pulled. I waited for the pain to come from my numerous injuries, but it didn't. I opened my eyes and watched as the roof of the cavern I had fallen into, which was hundreds of feet above me, slide past. I took a deep breath and sat up. I was a few feet from the edge of the lake I had fallen into, and there was a fucking tentacle wrapped around my leg, pulling me towards the sulphuric abyss. With a wild shout, I swung the axe down and chopped into it. The water erupted into a seething mess, and I was lifted and flung away. I soared for the air and smashed into the ground as the lake churned. Tentacles lifted into the air and slapped down on the water. I scrambled further away from the edge, panting. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the actual fuck? My normal eloquence had left me somewhere between that first terrible giggle and the popping of that disgusting egg sac, and it seemed my vocabulary was reduced to expletives. I watched from what I judged to be a safe distance as the churning water slowly settled and the tentacles slid, almost gently, back into the depths, and the surface of the water grew still. A dark stain rose from the depths, mirroring that perfect yellow. I stood staring at the stain for a long time, desperately trying to get my brain to come to terms with my new and present hell, when a voice behind me spoke. I truly didn't think you were going to make it there, bud. Well done.